And we are live. Welcome to Ethereum Hot Takes number. I already forgot. Oh,
9.
Number 9. We're back with another episode of the hottest and spiciest podcast in the Ethereum space. We are unfortunately missing Kames today, but with us we have Mr. Robbie, another member of the Rapid team. And this podcast episode is actually going to be especially relevant to his realm of expertise. And so, Robbie, you want to give us a bit of a background about where you come from, how you entered the space, and all that jazz?
Absolutely, I do. So I am a junior Web 2 dev. Admittingly, I'll take ownership on that. And I have always had an interest, or not always, but for the last probably 5 years or so, I've had a very strong interest in contributing to the blockchain and the Web3 space. And I believe I am some kind of proof that even as a junior developer or a young UX designer, you can contribute the efforts that you have into the blockchain space, be a positive contribution, and you don't have to have this plethora of knowledge and understand the bombarding jargon that comes at you from every direction to assist in different levels. So that's me.
Awesome. Cool. And yeah, just as a bit of context. So the topic for today is really going to be about kind of the journey of a new person and a new developer into the space and how you can get up and running and get started. Both me and Robbie work on kind of the 1 million developers initiative. And that's a main topic of focus there, which is kind of like, if someone is interested in the space, where do they go to learn about it? Where do they go to get up to speed with all of the stuff they need to kind of hit the ground running? And it's things are kind of scattered about right now, and they're kind of hard to find, and the discoverability is just not that good. And so we want to talk a little bit today about like what a good path for you might look like if you are interested in getting more involved in the Ethereum space. So on that note, Robbie, do you want to just talk a little bit about like your first foray into this realm and how you got started as a developer and like your first kind of toe dip into the space from a more like professional point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had taken it upon myself after graduating. So I come from a coding boot camp background, and I took it upon myself to simply Google how to develop in blockchain, how to develop in Ethereum. And if you just Google that, I believe even now you'll get Investopedia, Coursera, Consensus, Code Mentor, all of these different platforms. You'll get the Ethereum Foundation. So if you don't know which one to click on or which resource is the best resource to start with, it out of the gate is overwhelming. And if you click on any of those, they'll give you drastically different point of views or guidelines in terms of what you should, really focus on, what's going to be important, what languages you should use, or if you should even think about languages opposed to more the like higher philosophical levels of how Ethereum can, help promote really anything. So admittingly, it was a nightmare. And I know that a lot of people, Billy, I'm sure you included, and Kames and Joe and everyone, being early adopters. And I don't claim to be an early adopter of it, but there are a lot of rabbit holes you fall down. And unless you are really committed to the idea of it, it can quickly turn somebody off. So I didn't get turned off. I decided to fall into the rabbit hole. And the more I read, the more I loved it. There was the carrot on the stick that I kept chasing. And eventually I took it, I found the confidence to say, you know what, I want to contribute. I'm interested in this space. And something that I think about a lot is, without going on an immediate tangent, signing up for technology means you're signing up to constantly learn. No matter what you learn in college or where you learn in a boot camp or as a self-taught individual, going to any firm, going to any company, they're going to say, hey, what do you know? Great. You're not going to use any of that here. How quickly can you learn this new thing? How quickly can you learn our information? So once I realized and really owned the fact that I'm just constantly going to be learning. It's like, well, I might as well just learn what I want to learn. And so that was Ethereum to me. That was contributing to the Web3 space. So then I applied for an internship with Consensus, and Kames and Billy and Joe were very, very much part of, activating me into the space. And to this day, I'm obviously still in touch with all three of them, and help as much as I can in any capacity I can. And obviously it involves hat changes and being adaptive and being, able to maneuver in a lot of capacities, but there's always this strong sensation that I'm contributing to this space, which gives me a lot of confidence that the decision I made to go into this realm makes a lot of sense for me. It's very gratifying.
Awesome. And yeah, I want to touch briefly on a point that you mentioned about kind of learning on the job. So I think it's not even just Web3 specific, but I think a lot of people, when entering a new domain or realm of activity, people are just they're hesitant and a little bit scared and intimidated because they don't know what they don't know, and they don't generally know anything about that space, and they're just not confident in their own skills with respect to that subject matter. And I just want to say, no matter what job you take, no matter what you're doing, like Robbie said, probably most of the skills that you learned at your previous job or company or in your educational career, they're going to go out the window, and you're just going to have to learn stuff on the job. And so Don't worry about it. Don't be intimidated. Just dive headfirst in, even if you have no idea what the hell you're doing. Just jump in, and you will learn, as long as you are as long as you keep an open mind, and you are you put your ego aside, and you just are willing and accepting of kind of mentorship and the educational experience that comes with diving into a new role. You're gonna succeed, and you're gonna kind of maybe not hit the ground running, but you'll start running eventually. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like you kind of had that experience, Robbie?
Oh, absolutely. And, it's something that I think exists across all platforms, but particularly tech, and I talk about it a lot, is this notion of impostor syndrome. And it's a very real thing. And I wholeheartedly believe the only difference between a senior developer and a junior developer is the comfort of being, or let me rephrase this, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. And the quicker you are with being able to handle that sensation of, I don't really know what's going on, but I'm going to learn, that's the faster you can project forward as a senior developer. And I wholeheartedly believe, as soon as you start out, you're just I don't know what's going on, and maybe I shouldn't be here, and this is super scary, and everyone's saying all these words, and I've kind of heard them before. I don't really know what they mean, and I should probably Google 30 things after this conversation. I don't know if that ever necessarily goes away, because there's always going to be a tier of people that are speaking on a level that's foreign to you, but just kind of owning the fact that you're never going to know everything, but just knowing that you can look these things up, and everyone has to look things up, and everyone has to continuously learn, especially when we're talking about the bleeding edge, that's never going to go away. So I believe everyone in the Web3 space is a student of Web3. And once you realize that, it brings a self-confidence that makes it a little more digestible to feel a little uncomfortable.
Yeah. And yeah, I don't know who's listening to this, and I don't know where I'm just randomly giving advice, but if you're listening and you want advice, here's some advice. I've been here for 8 years, and I've been working in the space professionally probably as long, pretty long, longer than most people. And I'm still learning new things every single day. There's so many new things to learn that I can't keep up. It's absolutely ridiculous. And so I'm also a continual student. And at some time, sometimes I feel like an imposter. And when I listen to people talk about zero knowledge proofs, I don't know what they're saying most of the time. Honestly, this deep mathematical stuff, I have no idea. Yeah, I did Calc 4 or whatever in college. I went pretty deep. I was an engineer, so I had somewhat of a mathematical background, but I'm not a PhD in mathematics and cryptography. So, there's some crazy people in the space. Like, you're never going to be the biggest fish in probably any pond if you're operating at like this scale that you'd be operating in if you enter this space. So again, like, I think it's all you have to do is kind of put your, again, I said it before, but you just got to kind of put your ego aside and like open your mind, and people will be willing to teach you, and they'll be willing to hold your hand and walk you through the process of getting up to speed. If you come into the space with like some sort of arrogance, I don't care how amazing you are or how, great you were in a past life. People are going to be willing to work with you, and you always need a team. You always need, like, you can only do so much individually, and you can only get so far. And, like, the best projects, I guess, not even just in the space, but in the world, like, nothing's built by a single person, even if it seems like it, even if it's like marketed or externalized as, like Steve Jobs built the iPhone, or it's like, no,
right. Steve Jobs probably didn't write a line of code.
Yeah, exactly. Right?
And that's okay.
It's totally okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, you just kind of have to be, I don't know, a continual student and willing to learn, and also just generally a team player.
Yeah. And then playing off of what you just said about, you're not going to be the biggest fish in the water coming into this space. Something that I think about too is, an ocean full of sharks is not a healthy ocean. You need a diverse ecosystem in order to create something healthy. You need the coral, you need the big, you need the small, you need everything to create a sustainable ecosystem. So I don't know if there needs to be a goal of everyone needs to be a shark, but I think that this just like drives again even further this point of, you can have juniors to seniors, you can have people developing on a very deep, low level code, and you can have people that are designing flyers and everyone in between, but they're all contributing toward the health of the ecosystem. And that's equally important for the longevity of the entire project or the mission.
Yeah. And on that point, I'd say, like, having worked on a lot of different teams, I'd say the most valuable team members sometimes aren't even those who have the deepest technical knowledge or expertise, or who are the best at like doing a specific thing. It's like the people who like show up on time and are responsible and reliable. And when it's like, oh, like, can you get this thing done? They just like figure out how to get it done. And so, like, as long as you show up and you like try to do what's asked of you, like, you're gonna succeed, and people are gonna want to work with you. And so, yeah, like, I can't stress it enough, but just as you're entering the space, just like have that mindset of being willing to learn, showing up, delivering or attempting to deliver, and speaking out when you don't know something. Like, don't be scared to ask questions. People will be more than happy to answer your questions, and it only does like a detriment to you if you don't speak up and tell people what you don't know, because you're just going to screw over everyone in the end. Right.
And something I think, if anything, that's like a positive for new developers coming into the space. If we're to separate, let's say, and I know we talked about, Web3, but like, the state of the internet as it currently stands versus perhaps the state of the internet where it can stand, this 2 versus 3 aspect. The current state has a gajillion seasoned vets. And so coming into it and feeling as though, can I ask questions, or am I going to look like an idiot? I think that is, and I personally can speak to this, and a number of people I know, it's far scarier, I think, to ask questions in a space that is grossly established, opposed to something where you're like, welcome to the Thunderdome. Everyone's figuring it out. But because everyone's figuring it out and there's so many questions that are circulating, it's much easier to jump into that pool of asking questions. And the ecosystem from me is so welcoming of like, hey, you don't know this? Well, I know part of the answer. Let me connect you with this other person. And now you're like, without even trying, you're networking and you're speaking to all these people and you're trying to figure this problem out, you know, collectively, opposed to some senior, you know, being like, you know, this, you know, PR is shit, work on it, sort of thing. So I think that even though it is new and scary, and again, speaking from a junior perspective, it's much more of a welcoming ecosystem, in my opinion, to be in the Web3 space where everyone is still figuring everything out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. And conversely, I feel like to target the people who might, if there is anyone listening, that these are the people that are probably listening. But conversely, if you are well entrenched in the space and someone is coming to you with questions, I think the biggest piece of advice I have for you is don't assume that anyone knows anything.
Yes.
Like,
Yes. Yes. Oh my God. Yes. And we can please, I want you to continue, but this is going to be,
no, you go down.
I swear it's,
yeah.
If I walk into, let's take the analogy. I walk into a car dealership and I want to buy a car. I do not want to hear about the details of the engine. I just want to drive the car off the lot. Unless I ask you very specific questions. And I've spoken about this before. You know, we have the tiers of the hyper curious to the curious to the interested, the uninterested, and the against, right? So when you have the hyper curious who've adopted this space, it does, like, the UX and the usability of it doesn't matter. It could be a clunky piece of shit, but it's the technology that's driving these people towards it. It's the mission, it's the philosophy. So they're bought in. You don't have to worry about them. And then, so I would categorize you and a few other people into this space where they're in it and no question about it. I would probably be the tier below that. So I would be the curious, someone who's walking into it. Some of the groundwork has been laid and I can start to ask some questions, but then, you know, outside of that, now you have the interested. And something that I talk about a lot is that hyper curious, having someone who's so engrossed in the realm of, you know, blockchain and who speaks this nonstop to everyone and everyone speaks the same language. Now they're trying to talk to someone who doesn't know much about it, or they just Googled blockchain for the first time. That separation of information, I think, is so great. It becomes very difficult to communicate, and it's very hard to onboard people when you're separating these tiers. So in my opinion, the hyper curious need to mentor the curious to be liaisons below them, to be, or not below them, but to the tier around that, to the interested, and that passing of responsibility needs to continue so that verbiage is always applicable to the demographic.
I love that idea, because I was just going to say, okay, I think it's like almost impossible for the hyper curious or the super entrenched to communicate with like new people, because I don't even know the words that I'm saying that people don't know. Like, right. I feel like when you joined the team, like I was probably just like saying stuff.
Oh, just between you, Kames, and Joe, like within the first 20 minutes, I was just, my hand, I felt like broke with the terms I wrote down. Like, I need to look all this up and pretend like, you know, I'm just like kind of cruising. But no, I 100% agree. Like it's, and this is like my point is you get so nested and so involved in this space and you're surrounded by it nonstop. You don't even realize that your language is jargon to, honestly, like probably 90% of the world.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, it's quite literally like, do you know of any, like, what do you think the best way for a super entrenched person? Do you think it's just like passing down of the knowledge, like down the curious path? Or do you think there's a way that like a hyper curious person could effectively teach a interested party or a neutral party even?
I think that that's possible. It takes effort. You know, there are two routes. I would say route A is going to be you are passing the torch to the interested because they have their foot in each door. They're trying to get to the hyper curious. They're trying to get to that level, but they're also connected to the interested, so they can be that liaison. Otherwise, I think, you know, someone who is a hyper curious can formulate, and it would take probably some time and some review from the proposed demographic of creating a deck or some slides or a presentation that you can share that will hit on key terms. You're talking on a high level to gain interest and to, you know, nurture that curiosity, and then to feed a small amount of that tech into their minds just to get them going. Because again, if you bombard them quickly, if we're speaking on experienced Web 2 devs versus new devs, the whole point is you have Web 2 devs who, let's say they've been a senior React dev for 10 years, they're at a big company, and now you're throwing everything at them, and now they feel like their knowledge is shook. So that doesn't make them feel comfortable. So unless there's a strong motive for them to learn new things, they're just going to go somewhere else where they can apply the knowledge that they've already been vetted. Whereas I personally think it's easier to bring on new developers, because if you bring new developers on, their whole world has been rattled because you're learning all about this. And now to push deeper and to continue to learn, that's less abstract than someone who maybe hasn't had to go down that path in a long time. So it would take, I would think, a great effort to have a hyper curious or a very entrenched individual to go down that list. And it takes more effort the deeper down the list you go. And so I think the smarter thing to do, and what creates a healthier ecosystem, is to pass that torch, because then that's also lifting each of those levels up as they're sharing that.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I also feel like, though, at the lowest level of that totem pole, there's just people who like literally know absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I find those people kind of the hardest to talk to.
Yeah.
And I feel like people need to do some research before you can even speak to them. I mean,
Yep.
like, so how do you think we can get people to the point where they're just interested enough to kind of start learning on their own and to like read at least a little bit about this stuff?
I think that comes just down to user research. And if you are to create, let's say, a slide, and you wanted to present the ideas of blockchain and how they could positively affect the world moving forward, you need to have market research where, if we talk about our tiers, and I think it's in my head like 5, you have 5 tiers: hyper curious to against. You need to pool people from each of those pools to share that. But I think that the number of people you pool from each of those tiers has to increase the lower you get. I don't think you need 10 people from the hyper curious to say this is great, because again, they're already in it. So the further removed you are from the buy-in, the more research you have to do as to why aren't these people buying in, and how can we bring them in.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point that I haven't thought about. I love that idea. And I also think that the messaging or that initial hook is going to be a little bit different dependent on the user persona that you're talking to and like their background and expertise and interests. So I think like actually one thing that we kind of just kicked off today, I don't want to like shill our efforts at all, but like is like defining what those user archetypes are, or those like interested party archetypes might be, and figuring out what their skepticisms are, what their wants are, what their needs are. And then we can start to kind of define the messaging for each of them. And I don't know, if you're listening and want to help with this, I think that should be kind of an ecosystem-wide effort. It doesn't make sense for each of the individual teams operating in the Ethereum ecosystem to do this on their own. Like, we're just going to be duplicating efforts. Like, there's only like one set of archetypes and one set of like effective messaging for them. And so why don't we just all come together and determine what those archetypes and that messaging is like as a team and as an ecosystem. So come on in, hit us up, join 1 million developers, help us out with this. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, something that I talk a lot about when I give presentations at colleges or boot camps is I will bring up the idea of um, adaptability and how easy that is, or adaptability. And so and I've done a considerable amount of research, and I've looked at job postings for Web 2 versus, let's say, Web 3 postings. And because getting a CS degree is pretty much like the number one degree to get right now. And you've got kids coming out constantly every year that are graduating. You've got boot camps that are costing between $6,000 and $15,000 or $20,000, and they're cranking out 50 kids every 4 to 6 months. And this is across the country. So you have just a plethora of people that are coming out. They've got the same repos, they have the same group projects, they have all this stuff, right? And now they're knocking on everyone's door saying, will you hire me? Showing their resume. And that gets very difficult to separate yourself. And because there's such a huge amount of people that are all trying to get a job in this space, when it comes to standing out, it becomes really hard. So companies recognize this, and they also say, hey, because now we have to talk about compensation that's not that enticing, because I can ask for a big stack and I could pay you X amount of money. And if you don't take it, that's okay, because there's 2,000 kids behind you that will take it. So that's a very real reality for a lot of junior developers, is not only standing out very difficult, but then once you potentially stand out and a company gives you the ability to do it, their stack in terms of what they're looking for, and I have it in some of my slides, is like a scroll worth of nice to haves, requirements, what you'll need to know, and hey, we're going to pay you $30,000 a year. And not to like knock that money or anything, but it's like pretty brutal, because like I just finished college, I just spent a third of that on a boot camp, and now it's going to take me a few years to pay that off, whatever the case is. And so again, like playing off of what we spoke about earlier, is you're always going to be learning something new. I've pulled up applications or proposals from companies in the Web3 space looking for front-end devs or back-end devs or designers. And the requirements, in my opinion, are a lot more palatable, or they're way more digestible. And so what I want to prove to a lot of people is you don't have to be a master really of anything. You can utilize a lot of the efforts you have and look into this. And I don't mean to like shill this space as the holy land, and you come here and overnight you're just rich, and it's not so much that, but everyone is pushed into this ocean, and there's a lot of, playing off the water again, there's a lot of fish in this ocean. And I want to expose, like, there's this other pool of water over here that's still forming, and it's very new and really interesting. And you could probably make a larger impact over here. And yes, there is like a little volatility in that, but your ability to contribute and perhaps get a job, in my opinion, could maybe be easier, because it is the bleeding edge, opposed to having to compete with thousands of people or hundreds of thousands of people. And then you've got, mid-level devs and senior devs who are 10, 15, 20 years deep. And, it's really interesting. But I personally think the best people to pull in, or the most excited people to pull in, are going to be those fresh devs, because they're hungry and they want the work and they want to contribute, and they've been conditioned for years to learn. So they are easier to teach, opposed to somebody who needs more of an incentive to say, I've been doing this for so long, this is what my paycheck is, why should I come over here? I don't want to have to beg you to contribute. I want you to actively want to contribute.
Yeah. And that's a big thing for me. Like, one, I think you hit on a really good point of this space might even be easier to break into, because we're just looking for bodies right now. Like, our goal is 1 million developers. So if you're one of them, come on in, you're welcome. So it's not like, oh, we have too many developers, get out. It's right. Like, hey, no, anyone can come. And it's not just limited to developers. So your skill set, whatever it is, whatever you have done in your past, it doesn't matter. It's applicable to Web3. You don't have to be technical. You don't have to be a developer. Like, we need people from all backgrounds, all types. Yeah, maybe it'd be helpful if you like learn some of the lingo and terminology and know generally what's going on in the Ethereum space. Like, yes, please do that. But don't feel intimidated just because you're not a developer. We need marketers, we need designers, we need PR people, we need
Right.
everyone.
People who are interested in like we spoke about earlier, like in the financial realm, we need people who are interested in like the humanitarian aspects of it. How are we, how can we consider everyone who's interested in this space? What are they, what kind of technology is available to them? What can we offer to them? How can we make sure that anyone who has an interest can poke into this space? And that's not a role that just developers can fill. That takes a huge pool of people to make sure that anyone can look into this.
Right. And also, we're kind of disrupting every industry here. And because of that, like we need people with expertise in every single industry vertical. Like you talked about finance people. And I think when people think about crypto a lot, they just think of like cryptocurrency. Like that's not it. We're disrupting like healthcare and like real estate, and literally every single industry will be disrupted by blockchain. And so we need experts from every single one of those walks of life involved. And I think that another thing is don't be intimidated by the job requirements when applying for a job. Like I'll never forget, like when Ethereum first came out, I saw a job listing from some major company, and it was like requires 3 years of experience with Ethereum. And I was like, dude, it hasn't existed for that long. Like, how do you expect this? It's like impossible. Like maybe Vitalik, but yeah. So that stuff is always blown out of proportion. So don't be intimidated by that.
Yeah. That's like a classic joke that juniors like talk about is, entry-level position, 3 to 5 years of experience. And it's like, what kind of thing? How's this entry? I totally resonate with that. Yeah.
And also I've seen so many people who are extremely veteran and credentialized come in and just underperform. And I would be so much more happy with, someone who's young and hungry and who's willing to put the work in and learn. Like from my experience, yes, there's some people who are like extremely experienced who can absolutely crush it and really make a difference. And you need those people, like obviously, but for the most part, a lot of the more veteran people are kind of checked out. So as long as you're hungry, you're going to make it. And people will be really, really happy to work with you. Like as long as you put the effort in and show up and, have that, like that fire.
Right. I 100% I agree. And I think it comes down to this level of expected incentive. And I think the more senior you are, the higher the incentive needs to be to pull me away from my comfort, opposed to someone who doesn't have that built-in expectation because they don't have the experience. Their hunger level or their potential to grow is massive because they have kind of nothing to lose and everything to gain. So I'm not saying like let's fill the whole space with people who are like new to it, but I totally agree with you that as long as there's the liaisons to help guide those people very quickly because they've been acclimated to learn, they can ramp up to a level that's, pretty tremendous in a short amount of time.
Yeah. So we've been hitting on like kind of these high level, I guess, more philosophical topics. I'd love to dive into, how to actually go about getting up to speed and jumping into the space if you want to. So, when someone comes to me and they say, hey, I'm interested in Ethereum, where do I go to learn more? I typically have to say, oh, you go to crypto Twitter and you go to Reddit and you go to Medium and you go to ethereum.org and you go to, Consensus Academy and you go to YouTube and here's this and that and Ethereum Magicians and ETH Research if you're super technical. And then also this forum if you're interested in this other thing. It's a mess. So one, were there any specific things that you found incredibly helpful or useful when you were like first jumping in?
When I was first jumping in, one of the first things I did, and no shill, just like facts, I immediately found consensus, of course, because I was curious, and I went through the use cases of blockchain Coursera course through Consensus Academy, and I found that to be really interesting. In conjunction with that, I found, because I was, interested in development, I found some Udemy courses on Solidity that I thought were by Stephen Gritter, that I thought were really fantastic. And then on YouTube, Gregory with DAP University, I thought was really great. And then I found ETH Magicians, and then I found a couple other things. But these just based on like my learning style, I really like to like physically watch somebody and like see someone doing work and like audibly talking about what they're doing and why they're doing that. That really resonates with my learning style. It almost like kind of simulates a classroom. So these aspects really meant a lot to me. And admittingly, if at the time when I was diving into it, if I had a resource like 1 million developers, that would have been really helpful. And now when I give these presentations and I've got like proof on it based on the feedback I get, when people are like, but how do I learn? And I talk about these rabbit holes you can fall down. When I point people toward this, I'm like, hey, you're a developer, and I'm sure you've looked at Flexbox Froggy or CS Grids, these like little goofy games that teach you about development in this kind of gamified way. Well, we've got crypto zombies, right? And that's like a really fun way to learn how to do Solidity. And the way that they walk you through it is really fantastic. Or like, I need to make money. I'm a student, or I just got out of college. Now I'm looking at debt. I don't have time to contribute to open source. Well, hey, guess what? Maybe you check out some bounties on Gitcoin. Now you can contribute to open source. Now you can claim that you've contributed to open source, and you've put some money in your pocket, and you've learned more about the space. So there are, I think now that there's this aggregator of aggregators, as we've called it in the past, this is a really great forum that takes a lot of these, yeah, but I don't fill in the blank here. And you could just point them toward this mission statement and say, like, regardless of your level, you can kind of find your lane and you can build from that.
Yeah, and shameless shill right now. So basically what we try to do with the 1milliondevs.com website is, a lot of people there's already a ton of good education material out there. There's already a ton of good content. There's already aggregators of that content within specific domains. And so we were like, all right, we don't want to do more of this. And so what we tried to do was like being, as Robbie said, like an aggregator of aggregators. So like this meta aggregator. So it's like, we point you to the places where you'll find the best resources within each specific domain. And just to like show it real quick, like we got different paths for different types of archetypes. So like if you're a Web 2 dev, you go here, Web 3, Web whatever. We've got like methods for you to be able to learn, experience, and build, and also access community. So this is a thing that I hadn't seen aggregated anywhere else really. So all the places where the conversations are happening, all the ways that you can make money with Ethereum, all the events that you can attend, like metrics on the ecosystem, that's analytics. Then if you want to get involved in Ethereum or with 1 million developers, you can come here and then like connect. Like we have community portal, obviously. So if you want to talk to us, you can go there. But yeah, we did our best attempt at trying to be like the one-stop shop for this stuff. I hope that Ethereum.org can become that moving forward. So I think hopefully we can like work with the Ethereum.org team to like transition that website to that, because I think when people first Google Ethereum, they're always going to land on Ethereum.org, and they're not going to land on 1 million developers, and they probably shouldn't. So hopefully in the future that can be the spot. But we also we link to Ethereum.org from here for specific things. So yeah, for now I'd say head over, see if there's interesting stuff. And
what's great about it too is from an early standpoint in someone's career, regardless of what medium, networking is really, really important. And I know, at least in my cohort of the people, some of the strongest devs, I mean, they were the wizards of the group of 50 kids. They were just way ahead of everyone. When we were learning how to do our first commits, they were building out chess with WebSockets, and it was just wow, this guy's going to get a gajillion dollar job immediately. Some of those people admittingly had a really hard time finding jobs, or didn't, to this day, like are still struggling to find full-time employment. And I think part of that shows the power of networking. And so with like the OMD contributions to this space, that community, especially during COVID, it can be really difficult to figure out, how do I network right now if everyone is kind of encased in their cocoons and we're all making sure that we can be okay. So having, you know, this space where you can go and say like, hey, these are where all the webinars are, here's where all the conferences are, here's where all the communication is, that makes it really accessible for experienced or young Web 2 devs to say, well, I'm just going to join this. And I'm going to, if I'm an observer, if I'm going to be a contributor, it doesn't really matter. But finding a place to resource all of these upcoming events, it was in the past tricky, and now is easier, I think, because of the efforts that have been put forward for this. But that is undoubtedly such an important aspect of being a developer, is networking. And especially now, that's kind of sticky, because how do you do it? And so I really appreciate the community aspect of trying to bring people in and saying like, hey, here's what's going on, but you can still talk and we can still share ideas.
Yeah. And sometimes I think this space might feel like kind of an ephemeral thing until I know we can't really do it right now, but like until you go to an in-person event and you like see people talking about this stuff in person, and you can like interact with them physically, and, you know, just, I don't know, it just makes it feel more real. So I highly recommend just going to a meetup. Like, I don't know if you're not familiar with Meetup, it's just like a platform where I guarantee there will be an Ethereum meetup or a blockchain meetup in your area. I guarantee there will be like an upcoming event sometime soon. Go to it, just experience it. Hopefully your organizer will be good and it'll be a good event. But yeah, I think that's generally really important. If you can make it to a major conference like DevCon or Ethereal, like you'll be sold. You'll be blown away.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the first major event that I attended in this space, and I mean, I was already bought in prior, you know, like working with you guys and being invested in this space and doing my own research. I was like, this is it. But then once I went to ETH Denver, it was just like, this is the coolest thing ever. Like I don't need anyone to sell me on any, like this is it. This is home for me. And going around and talking to people from like all over the world, and everyone was just like so personable, and everyone's just like, you know, headphones on, hats on, like trying to build, trying to communicate. What are you doing? What am I doing? Hey, can you help me with this? Can I help you with that? What are you about? It was like just, and I've attended a number of meetups, but that was just, it really took me back on how incredible the community was. And in a time like this, you know, like the Ethereum Developer Alliance, you know, like checking that out on Meetup is really incredible, because I think that keeps you up to date with a lot of really important events that are coming up. And I've attended a few of those, and they're so applicable. And you could find that on Meetup. And that's just, it's just Ethereum Developer Alliance. And you can just join that, and you can just partake in these conversations that you maybe normally wouldn't have access to, and just get it, you know, dip more than a toe in the space and realize like, oh, this is cool, and I can actually like help. And that's just like what I try to promote all the time, is everybody who's interested can help. They really can.
Yeah. And like switching the conversation a little bit, you've been going around to like a bunch of different meetups and presenting to a bunch of different types of groups, from boot camps and beyond. But for people who are already entrenched in the space, who like maybe want to help with these efforts, like what would be your recommendation for trying to get new developers in the space? Like what are like the most effective methods or tactics to, you know, just draw people in to Web3?
I think taking real use cases and presenting that to them and saying like, hey, you know, this idea of like smart contracts can eliminate a lot of middle people. And like, for example, like I'll use like Kickstarter as an example of like, what is Kickstarter really doing other than just being this middle person between this exchange? So talking about applications or products that everyone is familiar with, and then saying like, you can still do this, but you can make this a peer-to-peer, A to B conversation without it having to have this intermediary between it, is really powerful. But then beyond that, kind of where I've seen people's eyes light up is saying like, you can apply React to this space. You can apply Python to this space. You can apply Rust to this space. There's no, there aren't 15 magical languages that you need to learn to do this. Like, you're still going to use CSS or SAS or MUI or, any library, and you're still going to, use the information that you currently have. And that's when people are like, really? I can do this. And it's like, yeah, it's like, you want to play with Vue, you want to do this, you want to do that, go for it. And there are a lot of tutorials on how you can, hook up MetaMask to an application. There's, you can, instead of create React app, you could do like create ETH React app or something similar, where you just like immediately like spin something up. And so when you really show at least developers that abstraction, like that level is not too far off from where they currently are, then that opens up. Like, you go from silence in the room and kind of timid to like, what is this? To like, everyone's leaning in and they're like, well, what do you think about this? I have this like idea of like making a voting system. Does that make sense? It's like, yeah, that's a great use case for this, right? Because like, once it's put on the chain, it's immutable. And we start to like talk about that, and everyone's like, oh my God, this is awesome. Or you talk about how, like Louis Vuitton or like Nike are exploring this to kind of remove the ideas of counterfeit, products and authenticity and traceability, and being able to look back to, if this has been sold a gajillion times, you can trace it back to the original owner or like what it was made of. And people just will freak out and they're like, this is the coolest shit ever. It's like, yeah, that's what I've been saying for 20 minutes. And I'm glad that, you agree, but it's just removing yourself from you, which I think is difficult for the hyper curious because they're so engrossed in this space, and trying to reflect back to when you were new and being a junior and you don't know anything, and what would excite you about this. And so it's just like really turning back in history and saying like, if I was giving a conversation to 30 Billies 10 years ago, what would hype me up? Not like you, because if you were to try to talk to yourself now with the knowledge you have, you might be too much for you, right?
Totally. Yeah.
I don't know. What's this guy saying? So you got to like wind it back, and you got to bait. It's all about baiting and just saying like, hey, here's a nibble. Are you interested? Let's nurture that curiosity, opposed to just like slamming them with lasagna and saying, eat, 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 eat. If they're not hungry, they're not going to eat.
Yeah. And since we're getting on time, to bring this full circle, Robbie joined the space, 8 months ago?
10 months ago now.
Oh, wow.
10.
Anyway, look at him now. Like, honestly, like, what? This is amazing. It's honestly incredible. So yeah, in 10 months you could be Robbie if you want to be. But yeah, this has been an awesome episode. Thanks for doing this one. Hopefully we get you on more of them.
Yeah,
Robbie.
no, of course. I like to be an observer, but I'm happy to talk about onboarding the curious, and I'm really, really passionate about that. That means a huge amount to me, and I want to break down this barrier of I need to know everything before I can help. That's just not true. And all I want to do is go around and say help, and here's how you can help. And wherever your expertise is, that's probably useful. So bring it in.
Yeah. And I'd say like I'm one of the more, I'd say like, I don't know, sticklers in the space, and I don't really like working too much on like a technical level with people who, we need to bring up to speed too much. But as is testament to the fact that you can hop in at any level of expertise, like, Robbie was pretty junior when he joined the team, and just because he was willing to put in the work to get up to speed and willing to like, just really like, I don't know. It just comes down to effort and initiative. And like, because you were willing to put in that work, like it's been honestly, pleasure working with you. So
I appreciate
again,
that.
just to come back to the beginning, hop in, give it your all, and you will succeed. And on that note, that is the end of episode 9. Thank you all for listening. If you made it this far, I doubt you have, but if you have, like, honestly, thank you even more. Hit me up. Maybe I'll give you an ETH for listening this far. Who knows? I've been on an ETH giving spree lately, so yeah. Hit me up on Twitter. But yeah, episode 9 complete.
Well, thank you
Thanks, all.
guys. Yeah.